The sea around Capri hides more than beauty. Beneath the blue water and white cliffs once stood a world built on silence, obedience, and fear. In the year 28 CE, a boy stepped onto that island, not knowing that he would never leave it alive. Behind marble walls and guarded paths, an emperor turned paradise into a prison. What happened there was buried for centuries, but history remembers enough to know the truth. Capri was not a retreat. It was a machine designed for control, and its victims were children. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. In the crowded slave markets of Ephesus, the air smelled of salt and dust. People spoke in many tongues, Greek, Latin, Aramaic, all blending into one harsh sound. Under the morning sun, rows of children stood barefoot on the stone platform, waiting to be sold. Among them was an 11-year-old boy. His eyes followed the ground, his thin arms pressed against his sides. He did not know where he was going. He only knew that someone would soon decide his fate. Buyers moved from one child to the next, touching their shoulders, lifting their chins, checking teeth and skin as if they were inspecting animals. The boy didn't flinch. He had already learned that fear made the price drop. When the imperial agent stopped before him, the crowd grew quiet. The man studied the boy's face, pale, small-boned, and calm. He whispered to the trader, and numbers began to pass between them. 6,000 denarii. More than most families would ever see in a lifetime. The trader's smile widened. The deal was sealed. The boy was pushed toward a waiting group, his wrists tied with a thin rope. By nightfall, he was on a ship bound west. The harbor lights of Ephesus faded behind him. The sea stretched wide and endless. He asked another child where they were going. The answer came in broken Greek, Capri. He had never heard the name. Days later, the island rose from the water like a wall of stone. Its cliffs shone white under the sun. There was no sound except waves crashing against rock. The sailors avoided the sharp edges, steering toward the only safe landing. Soldiers waited there, silent, armed, and watching. When the ship stopped, the boys were led ashore. Their names were written down, their origins recorded, and then erased. The boy from Ephesus became only a number in a list. Above the harbor, a path wound up the mountain. Guards ordered them to climb. Every turn of the path revealed more of the sea, wide, endless, and far away. The boy looked back once, realizing it would be the last time he saw the mainland. Ahead of him, the mountain held something he could not yet understand, a place where silence was law and obedience meant survival. Capri was waiting. Capri was not an island made for comfort. From the harbor, the land climbed sharply until it met the sky. The path to the emperor's villa wound upward like a scar across the rock. Soldiers walked behind the boys, pushing them forward when they slowed. The heat made their feet burn against the stones. Halfway up, the sea disappeared behind a ridge. The boy from Ephesus looked around and saw walls built directly into the cliffs, pale, smooth, and shining in the sunlight. Water channels ran along the sides, feeding hidden cisterns. Every drop was controlled, measured, and guarded. The place felt alive, but not in a kind way. It watched them. At the top stood Villa Jovis, the emperor's mountain palace. The building stretched across the summit like a white crown. Its terraces dropped off suddenly into nothing. There were no railings, only air and the crash of waves far below. One step too close to the edge, and you vanished into the sea. Guards waited at the gate, reading names from a wax tablet. The boys were lined up again, checked against a list, and divided into smaller groups. The boy from Ephesus was sent to a lower terrace, a dark row of stone rooms facing the water. The doors locked from the outside. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of salt. 4 boys shared each room, sleeping on thin mats. That night, he lay awake listening. Somewhere above, he heard footsteps, soft and steady, moving through the villa. He heard distant voices, orders given and obeyed. No laughter, no talking, just movement. The island did not rest. At dawn, the boys were taken outside. An older man waited, his back bent but his eyes sharp. He spoke in Greek first, then Latin. "You are here to serve," he said. "To speak only when spoken to. To move only when told." He showed them how to walk silently, how to bow, how to keep their eyes down. When one boy asked a question, the man struck him across the face and said nothing. The lesson was clear. As the days passed, the routine became their world. Wake before sunrise. Wash in cold water. Practice standing still until their legs trembled. Repeat commands until their tongues ached. Every mistake brought punishment, not loud or wild, but calm, precise, and final. The villa above them gleamed in the light, but for those who lived beneath, it was a cage. From the cliffs, the view of the sea was beautiful, yet to the boys, it was a reminder. The water was their wall. There was no way back. The boy from Ephesus began to understand the island's secret. The emperor did not build it to escape Rome. He built it to rule without witnesses. And those who lived here existed only to keep his silence unbroken. Morning began before sunrise. The sound of a bell echoed through the stone rooms. The boys rose at once, washed their faces in cold water from clay jars, and lined up by the door. When the lock clicked open, they stepped out into the pale light without a word. Their teacher waited in the courtyard, the same older man with watchful eyes. He carried a thin rod, not heavy enough to kill, but enough to leave marks that lasted for days. "Today," he said, "you learn to move like shadows." They practiced walking without sound, their bare feet sliding carefully across the stone. They learned how to bow deeply without losing balance. Every gesture, every motion, had to be exact. When one boy stumbled, the rod came down. No shouting, no anger, only correction. The silence that followed was heavier than pain. After hours of practice, they were taken to another terrace. There, musicians waited with small flutes and lyres. The lesson changed. The boys were taught songs in Latin, soft, graceful melodies meant to please the emperor. Their voices trembled at first, but the attendants corrected every note until it was perfect. The boy from Ephesus tried to remember the words. They spoke of gods, loyalty, beauty, things that once might have meant something. But here, the words were only tools. Each verse was another way to please a man they had not yet seen. In the afternoons, the boys were drilled again. They learned how to pour wine without spilling a drop, how to kneel, how to hold a tray without shaking. These small skills were survival itself. A mistake during service could mean disappearance. At night, whispers moved through the rooms. The older attendants told quiet stories about the emperor, warnings in the form of rumors. "Never meet his eyes," one said. "Never speak unless ordered." Another whispered about a terrace at the edge of the cliff, where disobedient servants were taken. They said you could hear the waves far below, but never the sound of the fall. The boy listened but said nothing. He understood that every word might be overheard, every whisper repeated to a guard. Fear became a language they all spoke. Days blurred together. Hunger, cold, practice, silence. But beneath it all was something worse, the growing sense that they were being shaped into something less than human. Every correction stripped away a piece of who they had been before. One evening, the teacher inspected them closely. He stopped before the boy from Ephesus, touched his chin, and nodded. "You are ready," he said. Ready for what? He did not say. But the look in his eyes told the boy that readiness was not safety. It was only the next step in a life built on obedience. That night, the boy could not sleep. The sea outside was calm, but the silence of the villa above felt alive. Somewhere, the emperor moved unseen, and every soul on the island held their breath. Weeks passed before the emperor's name was spoken aloud. Until then, he had been only a presence, a silence that moved through the villa like air. The boys knew when he was awake because the guard stood straighter. They knew when he slept because the island itself grew still. Then one morning, the teacher gathered them in the courtyard. "Today, you will serve," he said. The boys looked at one another, their eyes wide but mouths closed. None dared to ask what that meant. They were led up the winding path that climbed to the highest terrace of the villa. The stone was smooth under their bare feet, worn by years of footsteps. When they reached the top, the view opened before them, cliffs dropping straight into blue water, sunlight glittering across the sea. Beauty and danger in the same breath. Inside, the rooms were quiet and cool. Marble floors, high ceilings, pools fed by water channels that whispered softly as they flowed. It was like stepping into another world, a world built for one man. Tiberius. He sat reclined beside a small pool, his face hidden in shadow. Around him stood attendants, guards, musicians. Every person in the room moved carefully, as if afraid to disturb the air. The boys stood in a line, heads bowed. The teacher spoke softly. "These are the new ones, Caesar." The emperor's voice came low, old but firm. "Let them stay." That was all. No greeting, no expression. But the weight of his words filled the room. The boys bowed deeper, their hearts beating fast. The moment lasted only seconds, yet it felt endless. When the guards motioned, they turned and left as quietly as they had come. Outside, the boy from Ephesus breathed deeply, as if air had returned to him. He looked at the sky, but the light no longer seemed bright. The emperor was real now, not a rumor, not a shadow. And knowing that made everything worse. After that day, their training changed. They were no longer just students. They were servants, part of the household machine. Every task was tied to Tiberius's moods. If he dined, they served. If he walked, they cleared the path. If he summoned, they appeared without hesitation. Sometimes, the emperor's anger fell on others, a servant, a guard, an officer. Those who made mistakes vanished quietly. Their rooms were emptied before sunrise. The other boys learned to ask no questions. One evening, a scream rose from the cliffs, brief, sharp, then gone. The teacher said nothing. The next morning, the room that had held the smallest boy was empty. Fear settled into them like dust, covering everything. The boy from Ephesus no longer dreamed of escape. The sea below was too wide, the sky too high. Capri was a world with no exits, a place where the emperor's will was the only law. By now, the boy from Ephesus no longer counted days. Time had lost meaning on Capri. The sun rose and fell, the bells rang, the lessons repeated. Life on the island followed a pattern that never changed, like the tide. The emperor was everywhere and nowhere. His footsteps echoed in corridors, his orders carried by guards who never spoke. Every man and child on Capri served one purpose, to protect the emperor's silence. The villa itself seemed built for secrecy. Corridors turned without warning, ending at locked doors. Some led to hidden chambers that no servant ever entered. The boys whispered about them at night, saying that terrible things happened behind those doors. But no one dared to ask. Work filled every hour. The boys cleaned halls, polished marble, carried messages between courtyards. They were never allowed to look out to the sea unless told to. Even beauty was controlled here. The boy from Ephesus began to change. His body grew thin, his face calm, his voice quiet. He had learned to move without sound, to feel the shift in the air when danger was near. Fear became a kind of instinct, a warning that never left him. Sometimes, from the lower terraces, he could see the ships passing far out on the horizon. They looked small and unreal, like toys on a painted sea. He imagined that one of them might be going home, back to the city where his life had once been his own. But imagination was dangerous. It made the silence harder to bear. The older attendants spoke less and less. Their eyes were hollow, their movements mechanical. They had lived here for years, long enough to forget the sound of laughter. When one of them died, his body was taken away before sunrise. No one saw where. One night, a storm hit the island. Lightning flashed across the sea, and the villa trembled under the wind. From his small window, the boy watched the cliffs vanish under sheets of rain. For a moment, he felt the sea's power, wild, uncontrollable, alive. But the next morning, everything was calm again. The guards swept the paths, the servants replaced broken lamps, and silence returned as if nothing had happened. Capri did not allow chaos for long. The boy understood now why the emperor loved this place. The island obeyed him. The people obeyed him. Even nature seemed to bend to his will. Here, Tiberius was not just a man. He was something greater, untouchable, unchallenged, unreachable. And the price of that power was written in the eyes of every soul who lived on the island. They had given up speech, laughter, memory, everything that made them human. Capri had taken it all. The years on Capri passed slowly, each one blending into the next. The boy from Ephesus grew taller, his face sharper, his eyes older. He had learned everything the emperor's world demanded: silence, obedience, invisibility. He no longer asked questions, no longer dreamed of escape. By 37 CE, Tiberius had ruled the island for more than a decade. His body was weak now, but his fear of the world remained strong. The guards still patrolled the cliffs. The teachers still trained new boys. The routines never changed, because the emperor's control depended on repetition. Capri itself had become a mirror of his mind, closed, watchful, and afraid. One morning, a rumor spread quietly through the lower quarters: the emperor was leaving. No one believed it at first. He had not set foot on the mainland in 11 years. But by afternoon, soldiers began loading supplies onto a ship at the harbor. The household buzzed with cautious movement. For the first time in memory, the island seemed to breathe. When Tiberius finally departed, carried down the narrow path in a covered litter, no one cheered. No one dared. The guards ordered the servants to stay inside. Still, from small windows, the boys watched the procession vanish down the slope. The sea swallowed the sound of the oars as the emperor's ship moved away from the shore. The boy from Ephesus stood at the gate of his quarters, staring at the empty sky. He did not know what freedom meant anymore. Capri had taken too much from him: his name, his childhood, his voice. The silence around him was no longer a command. It had become part of him. Days later, news arrived from the mainland: Tiberius was dead. Some said illness killed him. Others whispered that his guards smothered him to make room for the next ruler. The truth no longer mattered. The man who had ruled from the cliffs was gone, and yet his shadow stayed. The villa did not fall silent in grief. It had always been silent. Work continued. Lamps were lit, halls swept, paths cleared. But the fear that once tied every breath to the emperor's will began to fade. Slowly, The island loosened its hold. Servants were dismissed, soldiers recalled, doors left open for the first time in years. The boy from Ephesus walked alone to the edge of the cliff where the sea crashed below. The wind was cold, sharp with salt. He looked down at the rocks and thought of all the lives that had ended there, voices erased, names forgotten. He was one of the few who remained. Behind him, Villa Jovis gleamed white in the sunlight, empty now except for the echo of footsteps long gone. The empire would remember Tiberius as a ruler, a strategist, a man of power. But the island remembered something else, the sound of waves breaking over the unmarked graves of children. Centuries would pass. The villa would crumble, and tourists would come to admire the view. They would see only beauty, blue sea, bright sky, white stone. But the rocks below would remember. The wind would carry whispers no one could quite hear. And somewhere in that silence, the story of the boy from Ephesus, and all those like him, would remain, waiting to be told again.